And so in addition to like getting training and creative breakthrough coaching, because that's the part that really is exciting to me, is helping people tap into creativity, especially after loss,
Mhm.
because I believe that despair is energy blocked. And if we tap into our longing, then we can tap into our creativity and switch the flow of the energy. And so I really feel like a combination of things came together to help me get kind of a head start on understanding collapse. And
And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world.
I appreciate you telling me a little bit about how your family is gathering in your current neighborhood, and and a little bit about your experience of the Dutch culture, and what a stark contrast. Even just a few sentences of your description had me pining for some sort of coherence like that. So, I think what I would most prefer, if you're up for it, is perhaps one at a time we could just sort of introduce and unfold ourselves for each other in the way that feels right in this moment, and and just take it from there, because we are in such similar neighborhoods that I can't help but think we're gonna have a lot of threads show up in a short time. So I'm
agreed.
happy to start that out, and I'm happy to have you continue because you were doing such a beautiful job as we began.
Go ahead.
All right. Um, um, I'm Dean Walker. I live in Southern Oregon. I've lived here for quite a few years now. Most of the past 28 years, I've lived here in Southern Oregon, or brief times away. Most of my career life has been involved with some kind or another of um, training, or um, adult learning, or executive training and coaching and learning situations, or community building, seminar leading, and also a tremendous amount of personal growth workshops of one kind or another, either participating in them or designing and leading them here in the US and around the world. I think what might be relevant in terms of what we were briefly talking about before, is that I became collapse aware and collapse acceptant quite early, in my middle teenage years back in the mid 70s. And I had quite a bit of psychedelic experience, and also quite a bit of what I would consider sacred time in both the deserts of Southern California and Baja, and also in the ocean and mountains there, primarily led by the psychedelic experiences, and then meeting a few mentors along the way. I got vivid pictures of that. We would be This culture would be self-terminating at some point within my lifetime. And that was a particularly difficult thing to try and process as a teenager, and I didn't have adults at that time and for years that could join me in that conversation in any way, much less to be able to help me sense make in that space. And so it was an unusual journey. And I knew as I was flying around the world to lead these various kind of workshops in wonderful places with wonderful other teammates and participants. It was a fantastic run. It was a life I could only have dreamt of earlier. And and yet always in the background was this knowledge, really an anchored and very clear message and knowledge that this was not salvageable. This was not something sustainable. This could not continue. And that's a bit confronting when I'm working with a team of trainers, with a team of high-powered executives from some corporation or another, and we're supposed to be talking about how to have them flourish at the next level in their corporateness. And so,
Yes.
there were plenty of chapters of deep dissonance, but that was somehow tempered by the vividness of the initial impression of this just isn't going to last. So it's nothing to take personally. Excuse me, was nothing that I was going to be able to do, certainly individually. And there was nothing that the global culture, or really culture at any scale, was going to intervene, to slow it down, to mitigate. It just wasn't going to happen, which might tell you why I named my one and only book, which I released in 2017, called The Impossible Conversation: Choosing Resilience and Reconnection at the End of Business as Usual.
Mm.
And so that's, a little bit of a very quick snapshot of a couple of steps between mid-teenage years and quite a bit later right now. And for the past 11 years, it was about 13 years ago that I got my cage rattled. Well, I had always thought, somehow I'd always heard the date 2100 as well. We just talk about that future. It's somewhere around 2100.
Mm.
And those were the very few voices over the years that were speaking about, yeah, there's some big stuff coming in 2100. Yeah. So it was about 13 years ago that I got my cage rattled by going to a talk here in Southern Oregon, where a a then fairly well-known pioneer in what could be called the doomosphere. I don't know if you've heard that expression,
Yeah.
but he's is a former professor in oh gosh, I've forgotten what his subject teaching was, but in any case, he went on the road for years around the country and sometimes around the world to speak about how this was all happening far faster than anybody could imagine. And that was enough for me to just get to really vet that information, and then to see if it did turn out to be that there was some truth to it, there was some possibility to it, that I would want to shift gears somehow. I'd always been at a level of acceptance, but 2100 gave me a lot of wiggle room to just live a life of, pretty cavalier, pretty unengaged, kind of who gives a shit, really. And it was rarely at that level, at that offhanded level that I'm just saying, but every once in a while I'd get waft of that. So my cage getting rattled brought me to a level of sobriety. I took on very sincere study, and I'm sure, like yourself, there's a certain amount of learning about the basics to be able to have some foundation underneath that sobriety. Otherwise, that sobriety turns into kind of a fragility in my experience of
Mhm.
resistance to really staying connected and especially to feeling much. Is that making sense what I just said? Okay,
Yes, absolutely.
great. So it was out of that doing those few months of very intensive research, which has not stopped till today. It's just expanded. I started to put together the book, started to research, because I realized that the vast majority of people will not follow this thread at all. They'll resist even the first few sentences of it. And so I thought I would share my experience of having done that research, come to these realizations, and then attempted to live a life of meaning and connection in spite of that knowledge or in conjunction with that knowledge. And it was as I wrapped up the preparation for the book, I realized I wanted to offer people the resources that I saw were not present for this kind of exploration, this kind of existential exploration. And so that's why I put together Living Resilience, and which has become a Mighty Network site and a place where we have online courses and support groups and coaching and resources, yeah, all that stuff. And I also started the Poetry of Predicament, a YouTube channel podcast, which initially was a lot of interviews with climate scientists and other people who were either at the time foundational in um, their exploration, their expression in this neighborhood. That's probably enough to give you a sense of. I'm just trying to look for a second if there's anything important to include as a finishing note. I can say that in some of my early exploration, especially in the video side, in the posting videos for the Poetry of Predicament, I'm really quite proud of finding some of what I believe um, were hints that we were exposing ourselves to the probability of this kind of governmental chaos and extraordinary cruelty, extraordinary rigidity, authoritarianism, and so on. So I'm just feeling into that for the moment, and I guess to just land instead of being so linear and descriptive, to just share for a moment and perhaps a brief check-in. My own personal capacity is pretty good, given this is my body of work, is to expand our capacity to be present in the face of ever-growing stressors. And, notice that that is not a statement of purpose of we're going to fix anything or we're going to create the new utopia, labada habada. All of those are possibilities, but that's, I think, very different than what I hear your orientation is, at least on the surface of it in my brief reading. I think we both carry those important elements of human possibility. I'm guessing that I carry a bit more of, in my experience, it's quite important to do some shadow work to at least become fundamentally aware of the global or larger scale dynamics of shadow. And then, of course, as personal as a person has the capacity to explore, to look at, okay, maybe I've got some shadow going on in these times as
Mhm.
well. And maybe it would be useful to integrate that and find a way of, if not fully accepting, at least far more awareness and perhaps some compassion for others in their behavior that I'm finding shadowy and so on. So that last part was about as fast as I've ever whipped through that part of the neighborhood. So I hope that was informative. And that's a brief snapshot of me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I was first struck by sort of a similar timeline of an awakening in our mid-teens. And of course, can you hear me?
I can hear you right now. And the last thing
Okay.
I heard you say before freezing was that we both had that similar experience of mid-teens awakening.
Yes, because at that point when I was in well, I'll start when I was 14. Uh, the thing to do in a rural community in the summer is to work in the fields. And so I joined all of my 14-year-old friends and 15-year-old friends to hoe onions. And it was a group of all girls. And we spent our days hoeing onions and slathering ourselves with baby oil so we'd get tan, because that was the mark in my community of being wealthy because you worked all summer. And so you were paid. So if you had a job and you were tan and you were paid, then you know that you were kind of a higher level in my tiny, tiny little high school. And that seemed to mean something, but also there were some other kind of disturbing things that were happening. So every day, at the end of the day, we'd be walking through these rows of onions. And at the end of the day, we would have this green residue on our bare legs that was from the pesticides and the herbicides that they sprayed on the onions. And we'd have to scrub it off every night. And we didn't think too much of it. But a few months later, in fall and winter, I really was thinking about that stuff on my legs. And I had just happened to go to our high school library and pick up Rachel Carson's Silent Spring.
Mhm.
And I was so shattered by that book because it really showed me that not everybody and every system and every company was benevolent, and that there were clearly dangerous things that we were being exposed to, environmental toxins, things that were shaping us, that were harming us, that people weren't talking about or were not allowed to talk about. And I was just shocked by it. And it really shook me in terms of, my sense of trust. And that's when I first started recognizing, well, maybe things aren't as, as simple and positive as I had always thought as a child. And I'd already gone through a great deal of grief as a child. Uh, I'd been through a lot of loss and abuse. And so by the time I was 14, I thought I was kind of finding some solid ground to stand on within my little community. And that was shattered. And then the next year, something even more shattering happened because I was the sole survivor in a car accident in which the other four teens in the car, including the driver, were killed instantly. But I was ejected and I was uninjured. And I was not from the same, I was visiting a friend 30 miles away from my town and for our birthday. And I didn't really know the other kids in the car, just her. And so it was a very surreal experience because not only was I ejected and didn't really know what happened, I literally woke up in a pile of leaves with flashlights in my face. And the police told me afterwards that the best thing for me would be to never mention it to anyone. My parents agreed. And they made me promise because they said that if I talked about it in my town, which, nobody would have any reason to know I was in that car. And they thought it would be better for me if I just didn't talk about it and just pretended it never happened. So I literally went to school the next day as though nothing had happened. And it was as profound of an experience as that was, and I was the deep gratitude I have to this day for surviving that accident. Um, the real gratitude is in that I survived the aftermath of the accident, which was the deep survivor guilt that I didn't have any term for. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I should expect it. I had not received one iota of, conversation or anything. Even my siblings never knew. I mean, it was just like it never happened. And so I was suffering greatly. And I did have the advantage of having access to some stuff. The accident, did I mention psychedelics?
You were just at
Okay.
mentioning psychedelics. Thank you.
Okay. Are we good?
We're good as far as I know.
Okay. So I decided to experiment with psychedelics, not because I thought it was going to be a mind expansion thing, but it was just something to help me forget for the moment where I was and what was happening and how I felt. Um, and I was more inclined to deal with choices that were more of self-sabotage because that's a very common response to survivor guilt. And I was just trying to come to terms with it on my own. But in that process, I did get some glimpses of or sensations of, something bigger and a oneness that I was a part of. And that was deeply life-giving to me at that moment and super powerful for me. And so for me, I came into my young adulthood having been through a lot of loss and a lot of tragedy, and also that responsibility of holding it myself without sharing it, and the extra weight of being unable to talk to anybody about it. And so I think in a way it really prepared me for collapse and the idea of, accepting it, coming to terms with it. Because first of all, I understood that early isolation period of feeling like you're the only one who sees, nobody else gets it. And so you're very alone and very isolated, and it can be so devastating. In addition to the recognition, is the sense of being alone. So I was uh, inadvertently prepared for that. And really over the course of the next decades, I chose to live a life that was as full and joyful as and full of travel and full of, I had 4 daughters and I had a loving husband, and just choosing life and very consciously thinking. And one of the reasons I chose to have 4 children is I was replacing, you know, the lives that were lost, not because it had been my fault in any way, but because I just wanted to make up for in my own life and somehow in the world the loss of their potential.
Hmm.
And that was really meaningful for me. So I come to this work with a combination of random skills. I was a preschool teacher in kindergartens in China. I was a vice principal of a kindergarten in China, and I was picked up by Jack Ma to serve as the uh, private tutor for his family in Hangzhou. And so in addition to like getting training and creative breakthrough coaching, because that's the part that really is exciting to me, is helping people tap into creativity, especially after loss, because I believe that despair is energy blocked. And if we tap into our longing, then we can tap into our creativity and switch the flow of the energy. And so I really feel like a combination of things came together to help me get kind of a head start on understanding collapse and recognizing and coming to terms with what is happening, and to get to the joy part that I talk about sooner than many others may at this point. Because part of the other thing is that, living abroad and traveling, I've spent a lot of time in spaces of uncertainty where I didn't know the rules, I didn't know what to expect. I was not an authority, and I had to be open to what I was seeing and try to make sense of it. So I think there's a lot of practice that comes with any time that you spend abroad, being feeling like an other and trying to make your way forward through that and make connections with people. I think that's a gratifying and also a very profound experience in and of itself.
Hmm.
And so when I really first, I guess, officially came to this work was when the pandemic hit. And at that time, I was living with my husband in a studio apartment in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, and we were had a very, very strict lockdown. We could not leave. We couldn't go outside for walks. And, you really locked in, other than grocery shopping. And there were police on the streets checking, and especially foreigners, they were watching out for because there was a fear of foreigners since the Italians were the ones who first brought COVID to Argentina.
Hmm.
So I felt like I might have something to offer. I knew there were a lot of people who were suffering, who were losing loved ones, and that was a deep period of uncertainty. That's when we were washing our cans and not wearing masks, and we didn't know what was happening. And so I think that that really was our first global experience of collapse in terms of it, whether because we've had a lot of local experiences of collapse, whether it's an economic crash or something devastating like a fire or an earthquake or a tsunami or whatever it might be. There have been those, but nothing, I don't think, other than a world war. But in recent times, COVID was something that affected all of us in some way, whether we lost someone, whether we were just depressed and isolated, whether we used it as a time to come alive creatively because we had these limitations that we had to work within. And sometimes that is the best spark for creativity, is not being able to do everything, but having something, specific that we have to live within. And so I reached out to my nonprofit contacts and in different parts of the world and said, who are the people who are falling through the cracks? Who do you worry about at night? You think they're not going to make it, but you don't have the resources to help them? Who's grieving hardest? And I got a few names, and I reached out to the women. This was all women. And I thought I just wanted to enter it with that sense of uncertainty and I wanted to be a companion, and I wanted to listen and hold space for them. And I did not really know what I was getting myself into. I really did not. And these women were in deep, deep grieving. All of them had lost at least one person, usually a partner and a parent, sometimes a child, to COVID, or some other illness. They were in the hospital and they weren't, didn't get the care they needed or couldn't get access to the hospital because of COVID. So they were literally, most women I talked to, I was talking to them while they were in bed. They were unable to get up. They were so depressed, so in so much deep despair. And listening to them and holding that space for them and helping them find that little spark inside them enough to get up, to take a shower, to eat something, to start moving, start living, start being alive, even with the weight of the grief. Was a real challenge, and I learned that daily support is the best way through that. We have this idea of traditional therapies where you go to a circle, talk once a week or once a month, you have a grief circle, or you talk to a therapist once a week, or that. But in that kind of grief, what really moves the despair and that energy that's locked and blocked is daily communication. So that was the model I had that I started with. Every day for 30 days, I would talk to these women. And in that process of deepening and of grieving and of unexpected laughter in a conversation and sharing ideas, every single one of them started a local project that uplifted them and unified others and helped the people nearest and dearest to them in their community, right where they lived. And, and it really was an experience of sort of testing what happens. So what do you need in a community? Well, you need to rely on the people around you. And so it was, I feel so fortunate to have been in that situation to witness it and see them come alive in 30 days, just by being witnessed, just by being heard and serving, not as a coach, not as a counselor, not as a therapist, but as a companion side by side with them as we walk through it together, because I was also going through COVID. I didn't have the loss of a loved one, but everybody had their own different challenges during that time. And so it was a sort of a camaraderie and a deep caring that we had for each other. And I think that's also a really valuable model. And so now in the last, whatever, three years or whatever it's been, I focused just on collapse. And I've chosen to focus on helping women. I didn't always, but now I am, because I really feel like it's time for more women to be, and women have always been the natural carers and the ones offering compassion and care to all ages within their communities. And this is a calling to go deeper and broader with that, and to offer some kind of training for others to do the kind of work that I've been doing, which is deeply human. It's not complicated. It does not require expertise or certifications, years of study or training. It requires compassion and ability to listen and not offer solutions, but to allow those solutions and ideas and thoughts and new directions to emerge. And it takes patience, but it's deeply rewarding for both people, for both parties. And so that's the work I'm doing now. I call it collapse companioning, because companioning is actually a term that's used by Dr. Alan Wolfert. He started in 2019. I didn't even read about it until I'd already, companioned 100 women. So, but I'm calling mine collapse companion because it's very specifically focused on not just the grief of losing a loved one, which is what Dr. Wolfert works on, but the very complicated sort of swirl of emotions that come with recognizing collapse, the grief, the rage, the fear, the guilt and shame, all of the different things that arise on almost a daily basis as we consume the news, as we see what's happening. And so it really does span a broader range of emotions. And it's not a one-time loss like the loss of a loved one. It's an ongoing loss and a grief for things we have not yet lost, but seem to be heading in that direction. So it's something we haven't experienced before in living memory. And I think it's extremely valuable to have other people to walk through it with and to share that with.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I'm noticing an overlap in what I hear the role you're taking on, and then it sounds like you're also inviting these women to grow into their own version of what I might call a space holder. So I'm real
Yes.
familiar with what you're describing in companioning,
Mm-hmm.
and they're very similar. And I'm curious, perhaps in a later conversation we can chat about what what ways in which that has grown. In my experience, the definition of space holder and the calling for space holders in every conceivable layer of our communities and culture um, it's changed.
Yes.
I come from a long lineage of my way of getting through the really tough points in my life, starting with being just an insanely angry young man, coming from a childhood of living with my alcoholic mother and blah 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 blah. And so I was exposed to very deep process work that I just became a love of mine. Like I just
Mm.
loved that space and I felt so nourished by it. And it felt such an easy fit once I had gotten through a certain amount of my own clearing and my own acceptance and integration and so on, that it to hold space for others was at least as nourishing for me as it might be for them. And I'm hearing kind of wafts of that in your way of speaking about it. And I'm curious if you're noticing any more attributes of the human experience that are starting to infuse into what could have been in a now 20-year-old book or more from, about companioning. To me, there's a very different calling now, a deeper calling about how to, um, boy, I haven't had to find a word for this. It seems like there is a calling for kind of a holding of the flame of what it is to be a human being right now,
Mm.
whether it's fighting off the authoritarian threat at the massive threat that is, and then in AI and job replacement and all the immense challenges there and so on. There are challenges that I've certainly never seen before in earlier decades of my life. And I'm curious if a similar kind of realization is coming in for you as you're putting together your work and growing it and evolving it. Is the definition of a companion, a person companioning, or a space holder, is that definition of that role changing, growing, evolving?
I think it's deepening
Hmm.
and expanding at the same time. Because to me, my sense of the term companioning meaning it means to be accompanied, to be not alone. Now, space holding to me sounds a little like empty space, and I'm giving you that space to fill it. But but to me, I think what we're longing for is a deeper connection to ourselves, to our others, to nature,
Hmm.
to our sense of possibility. And the idea of doing that alone and all of our isolation is what we need to overcome first, is recognizing that there are others going through this. We are walking through it together, side by side. We are all accompanying each other. And so to me, the holding space, even though I use that term, is the introduction, because that's the first step. I'm holding the space for them to share and to talk it through with somebody else who is listening and paying attention. I'm not doing a lot of directing, or, I'm asking questions, but I'm not doing a lot of coaching for
Hmm.
sure, because that's not what is necessary. What's necessary is for them to have that space to let their thoughts emerge, right? Let their new understanding take shape. And but it really, the key is not that they are doing that. The key is that they are allowed and invited and encouraged to do that by the presence of someone else.
Hmm.
And that presence is really uh, the gift you're offering, is the presence,
Hmm.
because all the other part is emerging from them. And they are going to do something that they can't even imagine, 6 weeks
Hmm.
from now. They're going to be doing something they cannot imagine. Um, and it's not me telling them what to do. It's
Hmm.
just giving them that space. And also part of it is, just we are so overwhelmed with news and all the things we do and all the things we fit into a day that having someone waiting for your response is also a rare gift. They're waiting for your response. They're listening and giving you time to reflect. Everything moves so quickly that that time is something that we're not used to, and we need to we will be becoming more and more used to it as things change. And so, but it feels a bit foreign to us. We're always in such a rush to come up with our responses to things and to have opinions about things and to stake our claim and to make our framework and make something our own when there's so much to be gained by simply being with another human and opening that possibility for connection and inspiration. And what I really feel is that the best and most important part of that process is tapping into longing. Because the grief, the sadness, the rage, whatever that we feel about collapse is reminding us that we are missing something. We have been missing something. And when we recognize and spend time really pulling apart what it is that we are longing for.
Aha, I see movement.
Okay.
We just had a little bit of freezing, and the last thing, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the exact words again, but it was you were taking us on that thread of inviting the person to recall what matters most to them.
Yes.
The longing, what they're longing for.
And a lot of what longing is, for me at least, is not not a place or a time or a person. It's a feeling. What's the feeling that we're lacking? What's the sense of connection or joy or satisfaction or enlightenment or epiphanies or, what is it that we're longing for? And when you separate it out, really interesting things emerge. And sometimes they are surprising because someone will say, I have never really spoken that out loud, because it was buried deep. But once it's there for them to see, wow, then they look at it from all angles and it becomes an exciting thing. Longing turns into something that gives them a sense of possibility because now you feel energized. Well, what would it look like if I were trying to replace or restore that one thing that I've lost or that maybe I didn't lose, but I forgot about?
Mm-hmm.
I forgot that was important to me. And now I'm remembering that it is important to me. And now I want to put it back into my life. And what can I do to do that? And so often these turn into such simple things that are joyful. Things like playing music with friends or singing or dancing or doing art or, planting a garden with someone else by my side, not just doing it by myself in my yard. A lot of communal activities tend to be what we feel will restore our whatever it is that we're missing. And that's exactly the kind of focus we need right now because we're looking at hyperlocal projects. We're looking at turning our neighborhoods into real communities and connecting more deeply with the people who are already right there, right around us. So I think it's a beautiful, simple, and very human readjusting to what life can be like once you recognize what we're losing and begin to actively participate in recreating that and in meaningful ways. It's less about sense making and more about connection building in a way that feels brings almost childlike joy, I would say. Childlike joy, because so many of the things that they're longing for are related to their childhood, are related to their times as a young person, things that have fallen by the wayside once they got busy with jobs and families and taking care of aging parents and all of those things that life brings us.
Yeah, I like the way you said that. I yeah, there's a seemed like a tremendous amount of overlap in our bodies of work and just some some little differences in sentence construction. I'm curious if there's any other level of engagement or kind of what where you're inviting the folks you work with, the women you work with, to um, consider what they may have forgotten or they may have given up on caring about or given up on trying to make something happen or realization of a dream or you mentioned time and again the word longing. Has any of that invitation either broadened or deepened given, of course, I my attention is mostly on what's going on here in the States, where my
Yeah.
experience is that our entire national culture is, for me, the word I would use is we're at a time of reckoning, but that's a little confrontational. Um, but my experience is that there are fewer people in touch with any kind of longing or even at the level of what matters most to them. And that's what, uh-oh, am I freezing for you?
You were, but now you're back.
Okay. What were you hearing last?
Just the part about longing, and then it cut out.
Okay. So
So asking the others, go ahead.
I'm curious if you've experienced either in yourself or in the women that you're working with, any significant kind of inner reactions to what's going on. Particularly, I'm thinking about there's a um, there's an armoring that can happen for some people to just try and distance themselves from what is an almost unbearable truth to try and hold, like how ICE is doing what it's doing and how we're shredding the social safety net and on and on and on and on. And I'm just curious if you're noticing different ways of coping, different strategies for just trying to get through day by day with this level of helplessness, of lack of agency, or one exception I'm seeing quite a bit of is the people who have, especially here in Oregon, it's been precious, coming up with talk about touching into creativity, existential levels of creativity, dancing
Yes,
around in an inflatable suit in the face of the most
yes.
horrific brown shirts that have ever walked American soil. Um, I'm just curious if you're seeing any different levels of either reactivity or creativity in the face of these heightened stressors.
Both. And the word I use for the sort of withdrawal is desperalysis, because there's despair, but they're paralyzed in terms of what they feel they can do, and so their responses to retreat, to avoid the news, to immerse themselves in something else, work or whatever else it might be, and just act as though everything is fine. And here I am in the States, and the last time I was here was a year and a half ago, and I see just life goes on. People are, we're dropping the kids off to school in the morning, where, everything's just looks normal.
Hmm.
Um, and that is what we're being asked to do, is to continue to live our lives and not let it get to us, But that's such a fallacy, because ultimately it's going to get to us, and we have the ability to choose how and when and in what way we want to not just let it in, but uh, open the floodgates so that we can absorb it and find our way to stay steady in it. Because you can only block it out for so long, and everything's going to become more and more intrusive. And now is our time to practice. Now is the time to develop this practice of letting it in, remaining steady, recognizing what we can do and what we cannot do. And I love that you talked about those kind of joyful, creative responses, because I also have a project called Disrupt to Uplift. And it's sort of a stealth group that brainstorms about creative ways to resist and to uplift others. Sometimes it's actual resistance in the face of authority, but more often it is something that is done within a community, a neighborhood, a cul-de-sac, that surprises and delights whoever comes across it. So it might be something that I call it the gasp and giggle. So it's subversive enough that if you see it, you go, oh, who would have done that? Who did that? And then they giggle, because it's like, wow, that's hilarious. And also right on in terms of what's happening right now. It elicits a response of unexpected joy. But what comes immediately afterward is solidarity, like, yes, I feel the same. I see that sign or that thing that you created and left here. I see it and I feel the same. And it inspires it's contagious. It inspires other people to think about something they could do to uplift others and create that sense of solidarity. And so, a lot of this resistance, the creative resistance, I totally appreciate the frog suits and all of that. Fantastic image and inspiration for all of us. But for most people, the idea of doing that is something that either nothing like that is happening to them directly in their community yet, so they don't really have that opportunity. But so I think what's really more inspiring is these subversive and silly acts of joy and defiance, and that are very small scale. Nothing that's going to show up necessarily on TV, although I've had a lot of people whose work has showed up on TV. Mostly it's stealthy. People are keeping anonymous. They don't want anyone to know that they're the one who did it. They just want to see the joy that it brings.
Can you give me a couple of examples of what you're describing?
Generally, it's things that have to do with an overnight redo of a space. So it might be an overnight mural that pops up on someone's wall. Not public. I'm not talking about public property destruction or anything really illegal. This is all creatively within the defines of what is allowed. And it tends to be something that stops people in their tracks. It's a disruption in their day, in their, swirl of emotions and thoughts for the day. It takes them out of that for a moment. And that's the power of it, because it really can make them literally stop their walk, their jog, their bike ride, to make them want to honk their horn in solidarity when they see it. So I think those kinds of acts are beautiful, because they give us permission to be creative and stealthy and secret. It feels fun, especially if you do it with a group of 2 or 3 other people. It's just like this little scheme you have, and then you see it come to fruition, usually very quickly within a day of coming up with the idea. It doesn't take a lot of planning. We need fun.
Yeah.
And and I think that, we don't have to overthink it. I don't think it has to be grand gestures. It can be the smallest things that make people smile. And I'm really one of the things that comes out of a lot of the conversations I have is, almost every woman I work with ends up becoming some kind of bringing that sense of the companioning into their own work, whether they are a social worker, a community organizer, uh, a, a designer, they leading a small business, whatever it is, they bring that in. And now that they're tapped into their longing and their creative energy is flowing, so many more of those things are happening, and it's just such a ripple effect. It's a wonderful thing to witness. But I think more and more of that, because it's so contagious and joyful, uh, is extremely powerful and such a simple thing that we can do. I mean,
Mhm.
anyone can do one of those things.
Yeah. 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 I've got I think, a strong sense of what you're describing. I've never really made any money in these 11 years of this body of work, and I don't know that I ever will. But in what I do for my living, I work in a hardware store here in Ashland, Oregon, and it
Oh,
is the center of town. I'm clear.
yes.
It is the center of town. It's like the organic grocery would like to be the center of town. No, it's the hardware store for sure. And
Yes.
those, I think they are moments very similar to the ones you're describing, are what fill my day. And it's certainly my orientation in every moment, which, part of that, the biggest benefit of doing that deep process work for years is I just got really clear the core of service that is inside of myself, and that flow and that cycle of naturally of giving and receiving, and that in that energy is has saved my life more times than I can count. And I think that's the zone you're speaking about, I'm guessing. So
Yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's a beautiful
And
thing.
certainly in the early, it is a beautiful thing. And certainly from the time COVID hit, the first few years, it was all pro bono,
Right.
of course. And I was working with women in 20 countries. So there were times when we had to use translation apps to try to figure out what the text messages were meaning. And so I got used to speaking very simply. There are a lot of people in the world of recognizing our complexity, who use poetic, beautiful language, flowery language and new terms that are unfamiliar to most people to describe this experience we're all sharing. Um, but I found that by necessity, and because I've lived abroad in multiple countries, and I know, and I've been a preschool teacher, so I know how important it is for things to be clear and easy to understand.
Mm.
I intentionally keep my language very simple, because I person I'm companioning choose the language that we use. If they
Mm.
want to talk about, emergence and everything, that's great. We can go that way. If they want to talk about shit hitting the fan, we can talk that way. We don't have to agree on the terms. We just have to agree that we see what is happening, and it's stirring something in us, and we're wondering how to respond to it.
Mhm.
So I've talked to those who are very much more interested in the actual prepping. I don't call them preppers, but they're interested in the preparing. They're growing more food. They're learning
Mhm.
new skills. They're learning how to, do wiring and, all these different things. Um, but I think that in general, most people want to talk in the most simple terms they can, about how they're feeling and tell the stories that come up when they are thinking about their longing, and not be caught up in trying to speak a specific beautiful language of all of the ways that we are talking about this time. And we have all the, look, I'm a huge fan of Joanna Macy and The Great Turning, and a lot of my work was inspired by her despair work, which she called it despair work before she wrote The Work That Reconnects and created that, which is very much applied to the collapse idea and the grief that goes along with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand the language, and I'm fluent in that language, but I let people choose which one they want to speak.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That'll be a really important core skill for anyone, be they companion or space holder in these coming months and years. I
Yeah.
think the next few waves are going to make everything that's behind us look really small by comparison.
Yes.
So, wow, I have no doubt whatsoever that this will be a sweet little podcast. Yeah, that has been. I knew it was going to be a great fit and easy conversation, and I knew that really when I read so much of your personal history that you shared in one of your Substack writings. That's really
Mm.
what had me want to reach out and connect with you was that level of authenticity and generosity of your sharing of your own hardships, your own challenges, and how you've really kind of molded your body of work directly out of your own experience. And that goes a long way with me. So I'm so happy to have spent some time with you today. Is there any way that you would like to just kind of wrap up our time together? Any expression for the folks that might be listening, or between you and me, or anything that would complete this in a good way for you?
I think what is really alive for me right now is the idea of considering benevolence and how we can infuse ourselves with a sense of benevolence and care and um, service, and what that might look like in our homes, in our communities, in
Mhm.
our cities. And I think recognizing that coming to our nature of being cared for offers us the opportunity to care for. So first, before we can do anything, we need to feel cared for, which is part of what companioning does, right? It gives someone that sense that every day someone really wants to hear from them and hear what they have to say and be there for them while they share their thoughts and emerging ideas. So offering care to ourselves, offering care to others, and doing that in a way that is in flow so that we don't constantly feel like we're only caring for others and get burned out, or we don't constantly require care without also being reciprocal in some way. We have to find our own balance that makes us feel both supported and enlightened. And I think coming to terms with that particular balance is the task of our time right now. And yes, it's going to get so much harder. But this is the time to be developing our own practice, our own balance, to find our footing, and to have that grounded gratitude that comes with living on this beautiful planet, and being reminded of our ability to connect with each other and to do good things together.
Mm, beautifully said. Maya Frost, it's just a joy to have made your acquaintance. I hope
Likewise.
we can make a habit of, I don't know, on some sort of regular basis reconnecting. Because I am uh, I am aware of the oncoming waves. And in the old surfer days, there was an expression as we're going over a wave to head out further out into the break. We get to the top of the wave, you'd be able to see what are the size of the swells coming. And if something is really significantly different and bigger, then you'd
Mm.
holler out outside, and everybody else knows exactly what you're saying. And so everybody starts to
Yeah,
swim, paddle, whatever, to get outside before it becomes just a washing machine where you happen to be swimming. So
exactly.
outside. And
Yes.
it's so so beautiful what you've put together again based in your own experience and what you've so generously then adapted and creatively embellished to be of use, particularly to women, but obviously to all the other human beings in their spheres as well. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much. It's been the pleasure of my life to be to have this opportunity to have this work. So
Yeah,
thank you for your encouragement. I
yeah,
appreciate it.
my pleasure. And I look forward to also an update about your family situation, which you shared before we were recording, um,
Yeah.
where you've got family members coming to live with you in your own neighborhood over in Europe. So, wow,
Yeah,
this is
not an
so
easy
great.
task to move to sell a house and have two people careers and kids in school, and it's not easy, but it has been our priority, and it's a beautiful thing to watch it come together.
Wonderful. Well, to you and your family, just sweet, sweet dreams. Keep going.
Thank you very much, Dean. I appreciate it.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.